We in the information age, and really what that means, it's oversaturated, like podcasts in the rap scene. It's confusing, whether you going live or you zooming. You ain't on the same page till you read what the room thinks, and the room thinks too many words, and every word is personal, and when it's in type, it's even worse. If you misunderstood, that's just how it works. So I'm a hypocrite just like the rest of the earth, and racists think you hate them, so they gotta hate you first. If miscegenation is a crime, the melting pot is an urn. Welcome to the Museum of Dead Words. I'm your tour guide, Dyalekt, alongside Pamela Capalla, Kristen Crouch, and Andrew J. Scoville. We spent the last few years pouring through conversations online to find words that kill discussions and ruin discourse. We dubbed these words dead and have been infiltrating art galleries, co-working spaces, and even Steve TV to share how these words died and how that matters. In the online series, we'll be spending about a week with each word, with Blueprints in Progress on Tuesdays, that's today, where we get deep into how a word dies. And on Thursdays, the main event will be a collaboration with artists from around the world to share their experiences with these words. If you know a word or phrase that has died or may be in danger, please share in chat, add to the dead word bucket, or even DM me. Little about the museum. We opened when your mouths did. Thanks to the generous contributions of millions of donors like you, we've been able to identify and catalog a growing list of words in the English language that have fallen into disuse. In the English language, it's kind of hard to tell when a word has stopped working. Being English, these words tend to colonize conversations and then just sort of sit there, festering, letting tone and context do all the work. Sometimes these words die, and it takes generations for anybody to notice. These words are dangerous, as words only become weapons when they cease to function as tools, and the sharpness of their wit grows in direct proportion to the dulling of their meaning. Some words are born as jagged abominations that offer no explanation or extrapolation of deeper meaning. You could say that when these words are spoken aloud, they're more spat than said. Words that emit a self-satisfied chuckle or a lowercase LOL. You see, these words are some of the worst ones. They exist only to cause chaos and to undermine the fragile bonds that connect us as human beings. The next word in the Museum of Dead Words is one of those words, and it speaks to the division that it intends to sow. It is miscegenation, a noun, born and died in 1863. It was pronounced dead on arrival. Meaning is the interbreeding of races, from the Latin miscere. Probably not pronouncing that right. My Latin's not all that good, but hey, the whole language is dead. So to mix, and genus or race. Had a whole book that you could check out. It first appeared in Miscegenation, the theory of blending of the races, applied to the American white man and the Negro, by the New York World Imagining, by managing editor David Goodman Crawley and reporter George Wakeman. It was a hoax pamphlet created by the New York World staff as part of an anti-Lincoln campaign ahead of the 1864 presidential election. It was previously known as an amalgamation. It is a literary forgery, a bite, a steal, a thing that is not even their own idea. It's meant to seem like it's something that supports interracial dating and just desegregation and probably treating people of color fairly. But what's actually going on, it's arguing against racial equality, and it's blaming the Lincoln administration for allegedly supporting the goal of racial equality. They actually tried to trick Lincoln into supporting this work, even though he was a little smarter than that, and he said no. See, the whole thing about this book is it was created as propaganda ahead of the 1864 presidential campaign. The New York World, I guess, was kind of like Breitbart with more class, or at least more style, because they came out with a whole book. Their whole thing was they were going to discredit the idea of Lincoln becoming president because he would allow the mixing of races, which would allow the mixed race people or the black people to be able to take over the world. They created this work of satire, this sarcastic piece that, well, it didn't trick the people of the time, at least not the people that they were intending to trick. That's the thing about satire and sarcasm. It doesn't really work unless your sole goal is to troll. And the thing about it is the trolling did work. P.T. Barnum in The Humbugs of the World, shout out to Eddie Online. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. E-T-Y-M Online. It's supposed to be Etymology Online. They mixed it together, but they did the research for me. They had a great quote from 1866, just a couple of years later. The design of miscegenation was exceedingly ambitious, And the machinery employed was probably amongst the most ingenious and audacious ever put into operation to procure the endorsement of absurd theories and give the subject the widest notoriety. The object was to make use of the prevailing ideas of the extremists of the anti-slavery party as to induce them to accept doctrines which would be obnoxious to the great mass of community and which would, of course, be used in the political canvass which was to ensue. That was in Humbugs of the World. That was a book that came out in 1966. People be sleeping on P.T. Barnum. P.T. Barnum not only was a very eloquent wordsmith, but P.T. was someone who really had an understanding of what was going on. The whole thing with Sucker Born Every Minute, that's a whole other story for a whole nother day. But what he was talking about is these guys created a word. And I don't think that people understand that the creation of words, the creation of images, the creation of pieces of art are what give people the boxes that we live in. It's the context. It's the thing that makes stuff real. You know, when I talk about how words become weapons, you see, words become powerful when they can create pictures. Words can make humanity seem more tangible. Think the great graphic novel Mouse that talked about the people in the Holocaust, but, you know, made it more tangible because they were mice and they were smaller things and easier to look to, or they were cute. Sometimes that worked. You know, you had your American Tail with Fievel, or even if they were sexy, you see sometimes the softening of people's hatred of people because there's beautiful folks involved. You see that with TV and with music. Anything other than being easily ignored. It also can give flesh and inspire generations of lies and of fear. You know, just like in the book Jaws and the movie Jaws, when people saw images of the shark that scared them, it caused shark deaths and mass extinction of sharks that's still been going on because people are scared to death of sharks. There's another phrase that glommed alongside of miscegenation, and that was race suicide. In the image you see above, you can see our modern women cheaters, the code word they're going with modern women, talking about how their modernness or their attempts for liberation are leading to race suicide. Shame, suffering of scarlet women. Gotta love the alliteration in a sexational expose. As Madison Grant argued in the 1915 eugenicist tome, The Passing of the Great Race, the resurgence of inferior races and classes throughout not merely Europe, but the world is evident in every dispatch from Egypt, Ireland, Poland, Romania, India, and Mexico. Neither the black, the brown, the yellow, nor the red will conquer the white in battle. But if the valuable elements in the Nordic race mix with the inferior strains or die out through race suicide, the citadel of civilization will fall for mere lack of defenders. Look at all that art going on with that. The citadel of civilization. So race suicide, it was kind of like the piranha to miscegenation's Jaws. And there's a lot of real world consequences that came from these ideologies being put forth. There was the 1917 Immigration Act that implemented a literacy test that required immigrants of over 16 years old to demonstrate basic reading comprehensive and also increase the taxes paid by immigrants. So again, we were making it so the people who had more money and were more educated, more likely to be white, were allowed. So the act excluded anyone born in a geographically defined Asiatic barred zone, except for Japanese people and Filipinos. In 1907, the Japanese government had voluntarily limited Japanese immigration as to not mess with the U.S., and the Philippines were a U.S. colony, so the citizens were allowed to go back and forth. China wasn't included in the barred zone, but it was already denied immigration visas because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, so it was already all good. In 1924, they even increased things. They limited the number of immigrants that were allowed entry to a national origins quota. It was something around 3%. See, 2%, 2% or 3%. It was a really small amount. And it meant that it had to be 2% or 3% of the total number of people of each nationality according to the 1890 census, so about 30 years before. And it completely excluded immigrants from Asia. Funny enough, it did not establish any quotas or any kind for residents of the Western Hemisphere. Now, as we're getting into the 1920s and stuff, as usual, I feel like most of these words and these conversations in modern times have had to deal with the whole Nazi party. So Nazis, of course, love using this type of fear. There was the phrase, the Rhineland bastards, and Rhineland was a place in Germany. It was coined in the 1920s for the mixed race babies of white Germans and Africans, which you think about the 1920s and Nazi forming Germany, the 1925 book Mein Kampf, where Hitler wrote, "It was and is the Jews who bring the Negroes to the Rhineland." It was always the same secret thought and the clear aim of ruining the hated right race by the necessary resulting bastardization. In other words, ruining the white race by creating race mixing. So how that went along before we got to the whole big old party of World War II, in 1937, those mixed race children of immigrants from the Rhineland were targeted for forced sterilization. In 1937, the mixed race children of immigrants from the Rhineland were targeted for forced sterilization. In 2020, the immigrants in the United States were targeted for forced sterilization. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Once the Nazis and the Japanese were successfully dehumanized and defeated as enemies, the communists became the target again. And with them came all manner of race-mixing fears. I missed one that I wanted to share with y'all from earlier before. If I go back a little bit. The Jewish plan for white genocide, I meant to share that one too, but that's another powerful image. These are all real images that people were putting out at the time. Busing is working for communists. This, communism and communist has kind of been a dead and radioactive word for a while now. I don't think we're really even ready to touch it. Here we're looking at how busing students to different neighborhoods is both communism and race mixing. And you can also look here for what miscegenation is and what we are to expect. This came out after Lincoln was elected, and this is the stuff where I'm starting to notice a pattern. Let's look at one more of these. This could be your daughter. This adds the Jewish element to it, and saying this could be your daughter. And that makes me think about what's the impetus behind all of these images and the things we're doing? Well, as usual, it's not just racism, as we were talking about last week, but as we're going to be talking about soon, it's sexism, it's misogyny, it's to protect white women. And so what's funny about how this type of misogyny, this type of racial inequity was created to protect white women, you didn't see a lot of images of what was actually, my parents' situation. I'm mixed race myself. I'm a product of miscegenation. I don't know if I mentioned that. My mom is a Black woman and my father is a white Jewish man. And they met 2 years after a pivotal court case. Loving versus Virginia was a Supreme Court case that struck down state laws banning interracial marriage in the United States. The plaintiffs in the case were Richard and Mildred Loving. It's really funny and pretty adorable that their names were actually Loving. But the thing that's important about these folks is that the white person in this situation was the man. This had a great lot to do with why this case was allowed to be sent all the way up to the Supreme Court and how it struck things down. Now, legally, we couldn't have miscegenation laws on the books. And it was a situation where we are realizing as a country and as a people, hopefully, that it's wrong to be able to tell folks that you can't marry and that you can't love each other based on who you are. So rather than laws, folks decided to go with shame. They came up with this concept of white genocide. The American Nazi Party's white power newspaper, the thing was just called White Power. That's how blatant it was then. If you're talking about people are blatant now. As early as 1972, they used the term white genocide. It was primarily referring to contraception and abortion. So basically, if you were using contraception and you were a white person, you were committing white genocide. If you were aborting your child and you were white, you were committing white genocide. At the same time, we had Black children and Native American young women who were being sterilized, just like folks are being sterilized today. Neo-Nazi David Lane wrote a manifesto called the White Genocide Manifesto in 1995, and it criticized miscegenation, abortion, homosexuality, the so-called Jewish control of the media, multiracial sports, and the Zionist occupation government that he said controls the United States and other majority white countries that encourage white genocide. taking things a step further. This got a little bit more powerful as we went through the 90s with white nationalist Robert Whitaker, who coined the phrase anti-racist is a code word for anti-white, which is a chilling phrase in of itself, but anti-racist is a code word for anti-white. Whenever we talk about dog whistles, diversity means chasing down the last white person. Whenever we talk about dog whistles and people using these innocuous phrases to create some violence, we can't not just go to these ones, but Stormfront, the online bulletin board that was created to support white nationalist David Duke's campaign for senator of Louisiana. They're Holocaust deniers, avowed white supremacists, and a general troll farm. They've been pushing this idea since the 90s. Sorry for the spoiler for fans of The Boys. This was taken even further by Renaud Camus and his 2012 book, Le Grand Replacement. Excuse me, French folks, I'm so bad at French. But basically, this wasn't just happening in the United States. In 2012, in France, there were people who were worried about French Catholics being displaced by Muslims. We had that back here in America with the Tea Party talking about they took our jobs. This also helped birth the birther movement, where we talked about the double whammy of President Obama not only being the child of immigrants, but also being a child of a white mother and a black father. This grew to stories of violence, of false stories of the rampant murders of white people going on in South Africa. You can even see this in Tucker Carlson of Fox News, who has engaged in lots of this replacement theory kind of fear mongering, talking about birth rates in the US using cherry picked stats by using fears of demographic change through immigration, feminism, and all these things that cause the so-called genocide of American white men. And the image that messed with me the most that I want to share with you guys is this is not a joke. This is not satire. I know this is one of the tough things with what we're doing today. Is like a lot of these things seem like a joke or satire or something that we're creating because it's obviously not true. But this is someone saying this with full throat and full chest. Multiculturalism, atheism, environmentalism, feminism, globalism, homosexual marriage, transgenderism, and abortion all have the same goal: white genocide. So I guess Public Enemy was right when they talked about fear of a black planet. When we look at this image, I want to look at this image again. The thing that's really powerful about it is, well, they have all of these black bodies, all these fearsome black bodies. And I guess black in this case is anything that's not white. And I can understand that and vibe with that. But they have black bodies all over everywhere that isn't Europe and North America, the two places that they've claimed as their own. And other places that aren't claimed as their own, well, I guess they can go home. This is that idea of that if you don't love it, you got to leave it. The problem with white genocide is that it creates a binary. And binaries are never really useful. With the binary, you have nothing but what I am. You got the black and you got the white, you got the left, you got the right. We have the wrong, we have the right, we have the evil, we have the good. And ain't none of that, ain't never been no good for any kind of people. With words like miscegenation, dead on arrival words, words that only exist to cut us in half, words that only exist to make people feel like they are less, then we can't really go forward anywhere. And we're constantly in a fight. And regardless of what people may think by using metaphorical language in the arts that we see, fights aren't conversation. Words aren't weapons. If you use them as that, you're doing it wrong. Check us this Thursday for our conversation for the main event with Jada Goddess as she takes us through the Miscegenation Nation. And we'll check you guys next time. Thank you. I'm Dyalekt. Peace.